Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, how did you get into the endurance racing industry?
Thanks, Fanny. Yeah, so I grew up in Zimbabwe on a farm, and I actually organized my first fun run when I was a 16-year-old at school. So back in the day, which people of your vintage probably wouldn't even know, we used to run on cinder tracks, which was kind of like clay, which had cinders from the coal fires rolled into the top of them, and our spikes would kind of penetrate that top layer and cushion the blow, so to speak, and our track had all of its cinders washed off it, and as a young enthusiastic 800-1500 meter runner, I thought, well, why don't I organize a fun run to get some money to resurface the school track? So I kind of got the bug then, and then I went on from there to university in South Africa and got very involved. Our club was very active. I went to Natal University, which is in a town called Pietermaritzburg, just inland from Durban, and we had a very active club with a portfolio of events. So very quickly, I was spending more time organizing events than studying, but realized that I really loved it, and I had the opportunity to work on South African Marathon Champs, the Comrades Marathon. We used to organize. This was in sanctions time, so we used to organize an invite. It was called the Citizen Watches Prestige. So just before Christmas every year, we had all the best athletes in South Africa would be flown into Durban, and we'd have this televised track meet. So I had this amazing opportunity there to get involved in the industry, and then emigrated to Australia and kind of arrived there with, I think I had about $10,000, and within about 5 months of arriving, I set up my business, which was in those days was called Sporting Spectrum, and that kind of grew from there to gave me the opportunity to be the road event supervisor at the Sydney Olympics, and after that, JP Morgan along as a client, organizing the JP Morgan Corporate Challenge, which I'm sure a lot of your customers would be aware of, and they then asked me to help them take that to Asia. So we set up the first JP Morgan Corporate Challenge in Singapore. I ultimately moved there, and the business grew to the extent that was, kind of a multi-million-dollar international business from that, probably $5,000 worth of working capital that I started it with. And we had the full commercial rights for the Singapore Marathon, which at its peak had 60,000 participants. I created an event called Cycle Singapore, which ultimately became Cycle Asia, and that went from an idea to 11,500 participants, from kids on bicycles to pros riding a floodlit criterium and age group rides through the city. And we then took that to Kuala Lumpur and Manila in the Philippines as well. So I've been incredibly fortunate to have had this kind of life where, when I add up the numbers, I've been kind of race director at the helm of events for over 1 million people, and worked on, numerous continents from Africa to Australasia to Asia. I just get such a buzz from being able to make an impact on people's lives, positively impacting their health and well-being. Post-COVID, the whole well-being part of it is so much more important. I think, it's that holistic health. It's not just the physical health that we used to focus on as part of the industry. And yeah, it's just, some of my most amazing memories are seeing, the reuniting of a family at a finish line where a mom's run the marathon and she's catching up with her kids, and the dad running alongside his little 2-year-old riding a tricycle in the Cycle Singapore event. And, the impact that we have on people's lives is super special for me.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel you. And now you're running the mass participation world, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you help organizers?
Yeah, so that was born in 2015 in Singapore, at the same time that I published my book, Mass Participation Sports Events. And I was launching the book, and I thought, this realization that this amazing industry that we're part of was in those days very fragmented, and in many ways still is fragmented. And I felt that, there's lots of kind of the running vertical works together, and the cycling vertical works together, and the triathlon vertical works together to some degree. But what if we brought together all of the verticals to explore the challenges and the opportunities? So Mass Participation Asia, as it was founded as literally just a conference, which with the kind of idea of it being an annual conference to bring the industry together across Asia. So fast forward now, that's now mass participation world, and we're in planning, as we were discussing before we started talking or recording, there'll be the 7th edition of Mass Participation World Conference, which will be taking place in Bangkok, and it'll be alongside the World Athletics Global Running Conference. And I've built a very strong partnership with World Athletics over the last few years. So the kind of platform is around education. It's around promoting collaboration and best practice. I'm a real connector. I love connecting people. So you're facilitating this opportunity to kind of join people up. One of the initiatives that I created during the pandemic was a global council. So we now meet every 2 months. We have about, I think it's nearly 35 representatives there now, from World Athletics to the UCI, the governing body of cycling, World Triathlon, World Obstacle, World Orienteering, and then representatives from the many alliances and coalitions that sprung up during COVID. And we literally have this global representation that comes together, and we share kind of updates and what's happening in their countries, and some of the trends they're seeing and so on. And then I kind of pass that information on every month with an MPW Global Updates, which I run as a kind of a Facebook and LinkedIn Live for about 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes it stretches to 25 minutes, and I just share all the trends and what I'm seeing. So this kind of promotion of connection, collaboration. We do some research. So we did a piece called The Mass Participation Ripple Effect a couple of years ago. With this realization that as an industry, we so often measure typical economic impact. How many inbound participants by number of room nights? There's a multiplier, and we go and tell cities that we create this economic impact. And when I was organizing the Singapore Marathon, and this goes back quite a few years now, probably 6 years ago, I had this kind of aha moment where I was getting funding from Sport Singapore to help deliver this event. But about 60% of that was being paid to Sing Health, which was, 2 government statutory bodies. One was paying me, the other was taking that money away to provide my medical coverage for the event. And, you would imagine, 60,000 participants in the heat of Singapore, lots of medical risk associated with that. And here I was, a private entrepreneur taking commercial risk, reputational risk, legal risk, and the government was charging me fundamentally to make their citizens healthy, was the kind of analysis I came to. So at that stage, we had 10,000 people coming in to participate in the event, but 50,000 of them were local Singaporeans. So well, that doesn't feel quite right, but maybe the problem is ours as an industry because we're not telling the story right. So how can we get a measure for the health and well-being impact? And I found my way to an incredible man in Australia called Peter Burrow, who's the founder of a company called Neuropower Group. And I had this amazing dinner, and he said to me, Chris, I think we'll be able to prove that the ripple effect of one person training for and participating in a mass participation event will go 10 people deep. So in other words, I'm the participant. I'm going to impact my family in terms of maybe my kids take up running. Maybe my wife starts eating more healthy. My family starts following me and getting a bit of a mental uplift from the pride of seeing me run. And maybe they even change their behaviors, and my work colleagues and so on. We got some funding from Sam Renouf and the PTO, and we did a 3-month study, desktop study, pulling together as much research as we could that was available in parallel universes. And it appears, and we're still hoping to try and find the funding to do a really detailed study to prove this out, but it appears that the impact is actually potentially 200 people wide, because it's not linear, but it's actually compounding. So what they recognize is that it's well recognized and documented that each of us have a circle of influence of about 6 people. And each of those 6 people have their own circle of influence, and each of those people have their own circle of influence. So there's this potential compounding. And even if it's not the compounding, this kind of, me participating in a marathon potentially impacting the health and well-being of let's say, Peter was right, in the first one, it's only 10 people. That's an enormous impact that our industry is making, which isn't being measured and let alone measured, not even being articulated. So, something that I'm very passionate about, and at MPW, we're very passionate about that, more research to be able to kind of inform the narrative and the decisions that people are able to make around the event and bring governments to the table. We tend to see this more kind of adversarial relationship between governments and events. And I'm sure you've heard it so many times. Oh, we can't get our permit. We're fighting with the police. We're fighting with the agencies. And I'm saying mass participation as a strategy is what I call it. Cities coming together collaboratively with race organizers and properties and saying, this is good for our city. It creates the old-fashioned economic impact. It creates health and well-being impact, and it creates local economic impact, which still isn't properly measured. So again, an example that I regularly use is when I first came to Singapore, to deliver the first JP Morgan corporate challenge, there weren't enough barricades in Singapore, and we had to truck them in from Malaysia. Cost us a huge amount of money. The industry exploded in Singapore, and there's now 2, maybe 3, multi-million-dollar companies doing barricade supply for all the events that happen in Singapore. And there's the metal providers and the masseurs and the dietitians and all of the network. And nowhere do we properly measure and articulate that local economic impact that our industry makes. So, trying to make this case to go to governments and say, stop being obstacles, let's collaborate. And from an event perspective, let's stop as event organizers taking this adversarial approach and maybe be going to host cities and saying, not begging them to give us a permit, but let's be partners, because this is the impact that we're having on the economy and the health and well-being of your citizens, whether that's a tiny little town of 20,000 people for a destination event, or a huge city that's, like a New York Marathon, or I'm actually on a plane tonight to Istanbul, to the Istanbul Marathon, which is this weekend, and I'm doing some consulting work with them to help them with their event, particularly around growing international participation in their event, but other elements of that event as well. So, the opportunity, I believe, is there for huge cities and small towns to be able to kind of leverage that. So, yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way of telling the mass participation story. Education, lots of free webinars and podcasts, research, advocacy, and consulting.
That's amazing. I totally agree with you. And it's so inspiring to hear you speak about how it actually helps people be healthier, because I truly believe in that. And that's why I'm in the business as well. It's given me so much in my life to do these events, and it's a lifestyle that just keeps giving. And it was so interesting, the study that you made on with the ripple effect of the influence that it has. Is that an ongoing study, or is it something that you already have results from?
Yeah, we have the white paper that we produced, which I'm very happy to share with you to share with your audience. What we're hoping to do, and haven't been successful so far, is to get some funding to be able to do a whole year-long study to actually, the idea is that we have a metric. So, in every event, you could actually go to the government and say, this is the health and well-being impact that this particular event is creating in your city. The idea is that ideally, we get this. It's going to take about $500,000 worth of funding to do it, but the hope is that we can help the industry globally for every event to be able to go to a city and say, here's the economic. And the analogy that I now use is I talk about the tennis ball and the basketball. So the tennis ball is the old-fashioned economic impact, and I think that the part that we're missing is the basketball, which is way, way bigger than the tennis ball, obviously. And what I'm passionate about is hopefully finding the funding to be able to articulate that, from an industry perspective.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And I can imagine there's so much more that you say that we don't measure and we don't know about. But yeah, let's continue a little bit, because I have a lot of questions. Do you have any thoughts on the future of endurance racing? I mean, obviously, I think you hope for more people to do it, but do you think that more people will do it in the future? And how do you think that new technology will impact the experience for both participants and organizers in the future?
Look, I think technology is a crucial part of it. I think the opportunity to integrate that not only from a participant perspective, so improving the kind of participant experience in both the lead up and on event day, but also from an organizer perspective. I think the reality is that the industry is in a lot of trouble right now, and I think that the almost inevitable, it would seem, recession is going to make that even tougher. Back in 2019 at the last in-person MPW conference in Singapore, the biggest conversation both on and off the stage was around how do we change the business model, which is fundamentally flawed. So, if you look at it from a pure economic perspective, the revenue inputs are entry fee and sponsorship. In some instances, government grants, and there's a few other, what I put in the other bucket. And this is broadly speaking, people like an Ironman and a World Marathon Majors, and the people at the top of the pyramid have a very different business model. They've got licensing and they've got massive merchandise sales and some broadcast and all that kind of stuff. But, the mid-tier and the base of the industry, has very few levers to pull. And we now sit here and, consistently what I'm hearing across the world is in most markets, entry fees, with the exception of a few outliers, entry levels are at best 80% post-pandemic. And that's confounding to so many people. We saw all these massive surges in people taking up running in the first lockdowns and cycling and so on. I think if people were really digging the data, they would see that in the second and third lockdowns, that actually petered away and many of those people kind of lost interest. And as an industry, we were looking at this saying, well, we're going to bounce back bigger than ever because all these people will come to the industry. And obviously the reverse is true. And, in some countries, those return rates are as low as 50, 60%, 70%. And on an industry with very skinny margins, so you look at, 20% down on entry fees, sponsorships, again, generally flat and probably as a generalization declining as brands have started to use their money in other spaces from a digital perspective and so on, albeit that I'm starting to hear some promising signs of brands saying, this is a space that we want to be in. It's great for our staff. It's a great opportunity for us to reach an engaged audience. But I still don't believe that as an industry, we're telling the story right in terms of those benefits that we're really able to deliver them, and particularly around sustainability. I think there's enormous, not just the traditional idea of environmental sustainability, but social sustainability and economic sustainability. I think we can tell an amazing story in our industry as well. So if you look at that as a business model now, even if we get back to 2019 levels, the other part of the ledger is input costs. And if you talk about 2019, huge percentage of the industry making very small profits or breaking even, now struggling with these reduced revenue issues. And I'm hearing generally, the lowest number that I'm hearing spoken about generally is 20% increase in input costs, and some people talking about as high as 40% on some line items. So, that just doesn't add up. And I'm starting to hear, stories of events going out of business, events being forced to sell, people just saying it's too hard, I'm not prepared to do it anymore. And then you add the third issue of the Great Resignation with huge staff turnover in many organizations, volunteers not coming back. And I think we have, this enormous challenge as we kind of reinvent this industry. And that's a roundabout way of coming to say, what's the role of endurance races and will they come back? I think they will, but my sense is it's going to be a number of years still. And the question that I would pose is that as an industry, we all mostly still talk about races. And I would pose the question to event organizers is, what are the problem that you're solving for your customers? The most successful businesses are businesses that solve a problem. And is the problem that our customers want us to solve for them delivering a race? I don't think it is, because I think that it's a very small percentage of participants that actually sign up to race now. Yeah. So, how many people are really striving to run a PB every time they run? How many people are coming to race to win the prize money, as opposed to achieving a goal to say, I finished a marathon, as opposed to it being part of what you've already discussed and alluded to, their health and well-being journey. So, I train with this milestone of participating in a marathon or a triathlon or an obstacle race or a swim run. But am I really going there to race? How many people are going to race to win their age group, to beat a personal best, as opposed to going there to have a great experience? And whilst ever we have these blinkers on, and I often provocatively say, is it time to take the race director straitjacket off? Because whilst ever I'm wearing the race director lens, I'm delivering a race, and I think I'm missing what maybe 80% of my customers are looking for. And that's around the experience, coming back to the technology we spoke about. It's about engagement. It's about engagement on the journey. It's about being part of a community. It's about all those kind of things. And the question I keep posing is, are we really narrowing our focus by constantly saying, my badge of honor is I'm a race director? And I take that, we need to have the race director on event day. But as you lead up to the event, if you're constantly wearing this race director hat, maybe you're an experience director, maybe you're an entertainment creator, maybe you're a health and well-being creator, does that open your vision and we talk about often in business what we call business as usual blind spots. We're so focused on what we're doing forever that we have blind spots to these things that are on the periphery. And I just more and more pose this question to say, what is it that we're really delivering? What is the problem that we're solving for our customers? And if we're really honest for ourselves, is the problem that they're coming to us for that they want to run a race, or is it something else?
Yeah, you're so right in that. And we actually made a small survey on our participant base, and it came back with, I think it was only 20% that had the motivation to why they participate in races to actually win, or like the actual performance or the result, and many more, like the rest were more either the experience, as you say, like you want the whole race journey, like everything from signing up to motivation to training to actually do the race, or that it's a social event, you meet people, you have a good time with friends, the traveling, like it's so much more than just a race. And I think that many organizers are starting to realize this as well, that they have to focus not only on the competition, but also the whole experience, like what happens when you come to the race, what happens after the race. Maybe there should be a little party, or there should be something like to connect with people, or also providing information at the right spots and the right times with technology. I think it's something that actually we at RaceID, we're really working on that, and think that it's going to be huge in the future to digitally be able to have a communication between race organizers and participants. So I think that would be really exciting. That's cool.
Definitely. Yeah. And that whole experience for the supporters on race day as well.
Yes, true. Mm-hmm.
How do we enhance that? And the challenge on that business model that I've already articulated, which everyone's well aware of, is, many events are saying, well, we just don't have the budget to create that experience. And so coming back to your question around technology, I think that there are plenty of opportunities around technology to enhance that experience. And it goes way beyond just watching a dot of your friend or partner going around a course and working where they are. I think there's so many amazing opportunities to enhance that experience for the spectator on event day.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Yeah. And my next question was actually what you already touched upon, if you think the recession will impact the market. And you already touched upon more details on that. But do you think, how long and how do you think we can get out of it?
Look, I think, the one word I use for that is, obviously the business elements of it are going to be a challenge to overcome. How do we best get out of this? I think it's through collaboration. And I think, what I saw happening in COVID was this amazing collaboration like we've never seen before in our industry. The alliances coming up, people sharing their plans. Sadly for me, as we've gone back to business, I've seen that collaboration start to wane. And I understand that part of it is there's many businesses that I believe are in survival mode at the moment. I think, company owners, fundamentally we're small business entrepreneurs. The bulk of this industry is small business entrepreneurs who are really jaded, really stretched, struggling for financial survival, dealing with all of the staffing issues of the Great Resignation, the lack of volunteers and whatever. And so the tendency is to kind of go back into our shell and say, we're in operational mode. We need to deliver the events. We need to survive. I would say that this is the time when we need to collaborate even more. We need to be sharing plans. We need to be sharing ideas. And I think there's an amazing opportunity, and I'm seeing it starting to happen in some parts, is to share resources around volunteers and even staff and so on. So I do a lot of collaboration work with Mike Nishi from Chicago Event Management, who is, one of the most sharing people in the industry that I know. He's always so willing to share his plans and his IP and his insights. And, he's kind of reached out and started purposely bringing in race directors from surrounding regions, from quite far away, people jumping on planes to come and work. And part of that is to transfer knowledge of the enormous depth that Chicago Event Management has, and help those industries in other areas. And part of it obviously is to support the needs that he's had after the Great Resignation with volunteers moving on. But if we take this approach of we're all in this together, I've got an event this week and you've got one in 3 weeks' time. I heard the TCS came on board as the Toronto Waterfront Marathon, and many of the race directors in Canada flew across to Toronto and they volunteered to be part of that event. It was this big reunion. I think that this opportunity to collaborate across multiple assets. So volunteers, for example, many events, and I'm seeing this starting to open up a little bit, but they closely guard their volunteer pool of, like, if I let my volunteers go and work on another event, they're going to share my secret sauce, and, they're not going to come back and volunteer on mine. But what if we in a town or a part of a city said, let's bring all our volunteers together. Let's use one system to engage them, because volunteering has gone way beyond just this free labor that we call up the school and they turn up and we give them a t-shirt and a sandwich and so on. They really want to be engaged. You have an amazing skill set in the volunteer, some really capable people that might be prepared to give to your business way beyond. You might have people with amazing financial acumen. You might have people that can help you with your data. You might have people that can help you with your marketing, that have highly powered daytime jobs, that are passionate about the industry, that could support you. But what if you were to come together as a group in the industry and say, rather than you've got your 500 volunteers and I've got my 2,000 and someone else has got their 3,000, why don't we build one pool that's centrally managed, that's rostered, that's well trained? Because it's in the interest of everyone that all of our events are well delivered. When you start judging, and some people judge themselves on the failure of others rather than the success of the industry. Ha ha ha, they ran out of water at their event, so I'm better than them, or their runners ran the wrong way, and I see that in some parts of the industry, particularly here in Asia. Is like, that's no good to anyone in the industry. So it's in all of our interest to make sure that we have really well-trained volunteers that are delivering a great experience. And if they work on 5 or 6 different events and collaborate together, and it's a smaller pool because people have decided to move on, we all benefit from that. From a marketing perspective, when I started in the industry, we used to market our events by handing out flyers at the finish line of each other's events. So, this is obviously way before the digital era. So, I would, depending on the size of the event, I'd print thousands of flyers. And I mean, at the start of my campaign, I'd have, 100,000 flyers in the corner, and they would progressively be distributed at events, depending on the size of my event. What were we doing? We were sharing databases. But if I were to come to most events now and say, let's cross-promote on our data, can't do that. There's data protection rules, which we can't be doing that. Or if I do that, they'll go to your event and not mine. But that's how this industry was founded in the running boom of the 70s and 80s. We wouldn't have done it without cross-promoting to each other's events. I had an amazing guest on MPW last year, who is the founder of GoDaddy, the big internet registration platform, and he was talking about competitive collaboration. So yes, we have to be competitive in some ways, but if we can collaborate, we can all be better. So, again, a long answer to your question of, let's collaborate, let's work together. The economic impact, I think, is only going to become more challenging. So, how are we going to drive more revenue? It might be, a better story to sponsors, but if their costs are being reduced, it's a challenge. How do we, how do we deal with this issue of runners not prepared to pay more money or not able to pay more money, or triathletes or obstacle racers, whoever they are, and entry levels potentially being low. And, it's kind of interesting because what we're experiencing at the moment is confounding in so many ways. During the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, our entry numbers exploded. People kind of saw running and mass participation events as an outlet. The cost relative to other things that they could be doing was relatively low. So we had this explosion. Maybe that's going to come if we have a recession, but the signs are not quite there at the moment. So, I think again, it just comes back to this. How do we collaborate? That collaboration potentially leads to, more marketing, more participation, but it potentially finds ways to reduce costs as well. Are there ways that we can do bulk deals with suppliers where we go to the barricade supplier and say, we're going to engage you for these 6 events collaboratively, and can you give us a better price? All that kind of stuff, I think, is the way that we got a better chance of beating it. I feel, without wanting to be negative, that I think we're going to see quite a lot of events and organizers disappear over the next year or so as the recession really bites. And I'm already starting to see signs of it in some markets where events are being forced to merge and going out of business.
Yeah, that's very sad to see. I mean, that's what we've seen also after the pandemic and in the beginning of the recession. That's many, like among the organizers that we collaborate with, also that they have had to cancel some events. But we are also recently, we have seen though that there is a big interest for registrations for 2023 races in our platform. So we are carefully hopeful that it is turning around now. Have you seen any similar trends? I mean, from the participants' perspective of wanting to come back to racing again, maybe if they've been injured or laid back on training after the pandemic and so on.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have a real finger on the pulse with participants directly, but I'm starting to see some good anecdotal signs in certain parts of the world. There's events in Asia now that are being oversubscribed and getting good numbers and getting back to 2019. There was if you look at South America, which marathon was it? I think it was Buenos Aires half marathon was the biggest race ever on record for that particular event. Highest numbers ever. There's a few of those outliers, but generally, and some sense, I've been speaking to a few people in the UK saying that they feel that there's positive signs for 2023. We do a lot of work as one of the partners of MPW Newco. They do about 3 million registrations a year. And Pierre feels that we're about 15% down on 2019, which is an improvement on the plus 20% that many people had been talking about. So I think there are certainly some encouraging signs, and it's just going to be interesting to see how hard the recession bites. We're hearing stories out of the UK of participants saying that they can't afford to pay. So some event organizers offering installment rates for them. So you kind of register now, pay later, or pay in 3 parts, those kind of things. So I think, and, my sense generally, and there's a lot of conjecture about why participants aren't coming back, and I haven't seen any real conclusive data at the moment. I think we're all making assumptions, and some of those assumptions are around not fit, and I've heard feedback of that as I don't feel fit enough to participate, which is kind of interesting because it seems that the areas where numbers are coming back a bit more robustly tend to be the endurance events. And I'm hearing lots of I'm not sure, so much about all over the US, but I'm hearing that a lot of the 5 and 10K events are struggling. And that almost seems counterintuitive. If we're not fit enough, we can go and do a 5K and jog it. So, but that's certainly, I know Parkrun, for example, they did some research, and that was an excuse that was given by many, or not an excuse, a reason. So they've now launched Park Walk to cater for the walkers, and I'm not sure how those numbers are traveling. We've got concern. I think people, just that whole cost thing, which I've touched on already. We've spoken people saying that they feel that participants have forgotten that joy is the term that's being used. You may have seen, we did a campaign with the Abbott World Marathon Majors called #TogetherWeMove, and we created a high energy video, and it was a digital media kit, which is still available in multiple languages on our website. And it's designed in such a way that this video that we've produced with an agency, it's a 1-minute video, it can then be customized where events can have a call to action for their own event, and a number of events have personalized that. And that was all around the joy of being together and participating in events. I think one of our issues, which is not a lot spoken about, is I think we lost a lot of trust of participants during the pandemic with the way that refunds and deferred entries were managed by many organizers. And I think as an industry, it's something that we need to address, because whatever the next crisis is going to be, people have long memories in those situations. They're going to say, well, why would I risk to register if I'm not going to get my entry fee back? And, I got it, my 2019 entry got deferred to 2020, and then it got deferred to 2021. And then they gave me a final date in 2022, and I wasn't available, and I was traveling, but I lost my money. So, and again, that speaks to the problem of the business model. So it's not a simple fix. If everyone were to have refunded those entry fees, they would have all gone out of business because of the cash flow nature and the limited funding in our industry. But I think somehow, there's groups like the Protect Group, which offer the opportunity for refunds, participants to protect their entry fees with refunds. Obviously, that's not, it doesn't cover COVID, but events looking at ways to regain that confidence of, if the event doesn't go ahead for whatever reason. One of the other challenges that we're facing increasingly now is the environmental issues of, fires and heat and storms and so on. There's more and more events being cancelled with that. So participants with now limited funds because of the recession are now being more discerning, I believe, to say, well, if I pay, what's my guarantee that the event's going to go ahead? And if it doesn't go ahead, am I going to get my money back?
Yeah, so that's a good idea then, a tip for organizers, I guess, to implement some sort of insurance or protection in the registration. I think that could be probably very good.
Yeah, and even if not that, Fanny, just a very clearly articulated policy of what happens. I think, COVID gave the opportunity for those that chose to really review their terms and conditions. And what I'm saying here is, be fair about your terms and conditions. It's not these draconian, you signed up and you gave away the right to a refund. It has to be a fair policy, but it also needs to be very clearly articulated up front. There's no kind of hiding behind it type of situation.
No, that's true. I want to be mindful of your time. I have 2 more questions. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to hear also your thought on environmental sustainability in races. Do you think that will be a concern with participants in the future, and that organizers should think about?
Look, absolutely. I think participants are becoming more and more aware of environmental issues and are more supportive of it. And I think as an industry, the challenge that we face is many people perceive environmental sustainability as a cost base rather than an opportunity. And I've had this conversation with many of them. It's too expensive to do the recycling. It's too expensive to buy, sustainable materials for our medals and the like. And I think that that's a misnomer that needs to be explored. I also think, we did some amazing work with Shelley Villalobos from the Council for Responsible Sport. She's recently moved on to another role, but, well worth going and having a look at their website and the amazing work that they've done in terms of accreditation of events. And they did some really interesting research. And I think I'm not great as a numbers man, but I'm fairly certain that the statistic is that 95% of the carbon footprint from most events comes from inbound travel. So, we think we're doing this amazing thing, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it in terms of recycling plastic and all those kind of things, but, the real opportunity is to look at the travel and how can you make your events carbon neutral by not necessarily spending money yourself, but giving ways for your participants to offset whatever their carbon footprint is going to be when they participate in your event. So, is that at registration? Is that something that they can opt into at some stage? So, it's about the narrative, and it's about an authentic narrative, but there are opportunities, and, to be able to tell that story that, 95% of our footprint is created by travel. Support us by offsetting your flights and your car travel or whatever it may be, carpool, do all those kind of things. That would in some ways seem to me to make it almost easier to be sustainable, because there's this complexity of what do we do with the plastic and how do we do all these kind of things, which can be complex, but you can make this enormous impact by just getting your participants to offset their travel footprint.
True. That is a very smart thought. And I think also to maybe encourage people to take advantage of the trip and maybe staying a little bit longer, and really the travel that you make internationally to really make it count, and try and give back to those communities as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, I have a final question. Like, if you're an organizer that feel like I really want to make a go for it and keep my race and keep growing in the next year, what would be your best tips for an organizer?
Look, I think some of the things we've touched on already: collaboration, build a peer group, learn from others, and then the real key one is understand what problem you're solving. Are you delivering races, or is it something else you're delivering? I think that there's enormous opportunity around health and well-being. Excuse me. One of the fantastic keynotes at the European Running Business Conference was Bob Verbeek, who's the founder and CEO of Galazo, which is a really successful organization based out of Belgium, but does a lot of work in many European countries. And he shared that many of their programs have a health and well-being corporate component around them. So the event is the culmination of a journey. So they create a 3-month, 2-month type of program in the lead up to the event, sometimes even longer than that, from what I understand. And they work with corporate partners to give, mental health seminars and diet seminars and all these kind of things that are well-being related that lead up to the event. So they take their staff on this journey. Corporates are very aware of the need to, have healthy staff, both mentally and physically, but also to retain staff. So, they're looking for opportunities to be able to do that. And this opportunity, I'm wondering, to be able to say, okay, I've got this marathon. How's there an opportunity to engage with the local community, whether that's a big city or a town, to bring the corporates on the journey, to have these corporate runners it's being budgeted for, and I'm creating extra revenue streams. I think that we've already touched on the business plan, which is fundamentally flawed, of 2 input levers. How can you create new revenue streams that are in front of you? I think the other one is around data, and data as it's pronounced in the US is, one of the sessions that we will be having at MPW in Bangkok is around the opportunity for collaborative data use and compliant collaborative data use. So, I think many organizers are fearful of data, and some of them have told me that, it's like, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to process it. We're scared of the compliance issues. Are there opportunities to work with your partner, your sponsor, that may be a big corporate who has a big back office group that could support you, and within, accepted compliance, be able to say, well, can you help us to interrogate and analyze this data to give us some outputs and understandings of what our participants want and what they're doing and their behaviors and so on. What if you were then to come together as a bigger group within, let's get 2 or 3 or 4 runs together, and, it's not about breaking, data protection rules in any way. It's a matter of, I think we're an industry that's incredibly fortunate that participants are prepared to give us their data. But what are we doing with that? And is it a revenue stream opportunity that we're missing? How do we engage more with our participants? I still see so many organizers who kind of fanny entries for the Race of Open. Please sign up. Here's a training program. Here's some information. Connect your race pack. Thanks for running. Thanks for swimming, whatever it is. And then 6 months of silence and they start the whole conversation again. And when they start that conversation, they go and spend money on Facebook ads and other ways to go and acquire new customers when they're not even engaging with their existing customers. So that would be another tip. What are you doing to engage authentically with your customers, understanding what it is that they want, understanding what it is that you can do for them, and engage with them to find ways that you might be able to generate new revenue streams from them rather than spending money trying to acquire new customers. So, if we look at this, 80% of 2019 levels at the moment, many events are saying we need to go and attract new people. I'm saying, what are you doing to engage with those 2019 runners who haven't returned, to understand why they haven't returned and find a way to get them to come back? How about the 2018 and 17 and 15 and 16 ones, if you've got their data? Let's talk to those people and understand what it is that they want and how we can bring them back rather than going looking over the fence trying to find new customers.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I think also that the data around endurance racing, it's definitely underutilized and something we're looking into make a difference on. So it's very exciting. Lots that can be done, and I think we have an exciting future in front of us. Even it might look a little bit difficult right now, but I'm sure that people will realize the benefits that come out from endurance racing. And when organizers also step up to make a really great experience around it and make people understand how great it is, I think we have a lot to look forward to. Definitely.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, I have no doubt that our industry has an enormous role to play in the health and well-being of humanity. And I think people more and more realize that, we like to be together. We like to be part of a community. We want to be part of a community. And I think there's an enormous opportunity. Will it take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to get back? I'm not sure, but I have no doubt that we'll look back and say COVID presented this enormous opportunity, and those that were able to leverage that will be looking and saying, we've built amazing businesses and we continue to create an enormous impact on society.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was very insightful and very inspiring.
No, thank you. Wonderful to have the opportunity. Great to meet you and great to speak to you.